So, Mr. Talaugon, how did you come by your last name?
Okay, my name is Talaugon. It's Joseph Talaugon. It's not a Chumash name, but I am Chumash on my mother's side of ancestry. When my mother was, when I was born in 1930, my mother was, pregnant with me and had me as a child, but there was no man there, so she was a single mother. And so when I was a year and a half old, my mother, as a young woman with one child, me, she met a Filipino man who had come from the Philippines in the mid-1920s and came to Ventura, California. And that's where she met him. And she married him. And from that point on, his name was Arcadio Talaugon, so I took that name as my name, my last name. But he really was my stepfather. So I never really knew who my biological father was. So Talaugon has been my name all my life, but in the later years in my life, in my mid-30s, I had no knowledge up to that point about my Chumash ancestry. My mother never talked about it. She, kept everything to herself. I guess in those times, when she was born, in that generation, it was pretty devastating, or not popular for Native people to state who their ancestor was or what culture they had. So they kind of kept it quiet. So but me, out of curiosity in the mid-30s, I started researching my Chumash side of me. I knew that much from my mother being Chumash Indian from the San Ynez Valley. So that's kind of where the story of how I became aware of my Chumash culture. As I get older and learning and studying more about researching on my ancestry and who my grandfather was and all that sort of stuff, research, I found out many connections that my mother's family had right here in the San Ynez Valley. And so, that's basically how I began my understanding of what my Chumash culture is. But like I said earlier, I was raised by a Filipino stepfather who taught me the Filipino culture. And not too much the language, but we learned some words. But the culture, the customs we had in the house were Filipino, and my brothers and sisters were, his children, and we grew up that way. Basically, we grew up during the period of the Great Depression, and so we were very poor, living on farms. My father was a farm worker, and so we grew up very poor in these old farms around the valley here in Santa Maria Valley. That's pretty much it right there. I don't know.
So it's just curiosity as you grew older about your Chumash side of your culture.
Well, yes and no. I mean, when in 1965, I was 35 years old, and I had 7 children already, and my wife and I decided we had lived here in Guadalupe all our lives up to that point. So at that stage of our lives, I was in the construction work, and I wanted to move away from here to go find work in other parts of the state. So we moved up north to Sonoma County, and I continued my construction work up there, and we got our own place and bought a house and everything. And so things were going good in the Sonoma County, in a little town called Sonoma. So while we were there, we've always been, my wife and I have always been community-oriented people. We always, worked in the community with the underprivileged or some type of issues that are in the community. So we got involved in the Santa Rosa community with the Native Americans and the Mexicans and the Filipinos, because this was in late 1960s, early 1970s, when there was a lot of issues in the community concerning civil rights and discrimination, racism, and all that. So we got involved with that, and in doing so, I met a lot of Native Americans from that part of the state, and I got very involved with the Native people there. It was during the Alcatraz occupation, which I didn't go there, but I was involved in a way on the outside communities. So being curious about my Chumash culture, ancestry, and being involved with these other Native people, it all the more made me, want to know more about, where I came from, where my people are from, and all this. So basically, I learned about my ancestry and where they lived around the Santa Barbara County area. I learned about that while I was living in Northern California. So I got involved. We learned I learned a lot about the, they call it the Pomo people. That's the Indian people from that area up there. So, and the Miwoks. So, I got involved with that. Met many good leaders, and community workers, and so there was activity, always cultural activities. I learned the ceremonies, of the spiritual ceremonies that they had. So my learning about Native American was about a different tribe. And so as I became more involved, all the more I got more curious about myself. So I came back to this area and went to San Ynez and looked up many relatives that my mother had there in the San Ynez Indian Reservation. And to my surprise, I found out, uncles and cousins and grandfathers that had passed on, but had lived there. So it was a great experience for me. It was an awakening that I can't seem, it's not easy to describe, because it was like an awakening to me. Because up to that point, I only knew the Filipino culture, and I only knew, the American culture, going through the American schools and stuff. So that's kind of where I started, with my beginning of my cultural awareness.
Did finding out more of your culture as a Chumash, does that become part of your identity after you have this awakening? Is it now like, not only am I American, not only am I Filipino, but I'm Chumash, and that becomes more prominent in your life?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question, because that played a made a big impact in my life. When I started to, up to that point, into my mid-30s, you know, being with the Filipino culture and, you know, growing up in the American schools, you know, that's all I knew, you know. And I was kind of like I really didn't know where I belonged. I would go, you know, growing up in a small town like this, there's a lot of Mexicans, so I would go with them. I'd hang out with, had many Mexican friends. Then I had Filipino friends. I had Japanese friends. I had just a mixture of people, you know, and, you know, Anglo people, and played a lot of sports. So, you know, when people would ask me, well, what nationality are you? I felt kind of awkward because I really couldn't identify myself, you know. So that kind of plagued me for a long time. You know, wherever I went, I felt very uncomfortable, or, you know, not feel like a whole person. We would be involved with, let's say, for example, a Mexican organization, and maybe went to a function where they spoke Spanish. So I felt out of place because I didn't speak fluent Spanish. I didn't understand their culture that much, you know, just a very little bit. So it was really awkward for me growing up to that point. So I wanted to find this identity. I was, you know, trying every way I could to understand more. And the more I got involved with the native people up there, the more I felt comfortable. I had this feeling of understanding, of feeling part of. So I knew within myself that something was missing, but I knew I had to find that. What was it? Okay, go back to childhood. I grew up, you know, I was baptized, and, you know, my mother took us to the Catholic Church, and we grew up as Catholics, and you know, did all the, you know, the things that they do in the church. And when I learned more about Native American spiritual understanding, spiritual ways, I noticed that there was no connection to the Catholic Church. So I thought, well, how does this work? You know, I'm a Catholic, but I'm not a practicing Catholic. But I feel comfortable with the native way, the spiritual way, you know, praying to the Great Spirit, and understanding that there's a creator, you know, the creator of all things. So I was very, very curious to find more, find that spiritual connection. And that's what I needed, you know, at the time of my life. So I kept seeking it out, but I couldn't find it, because all we did was, you know, did a lot of praying and ceremony within the community, but it wasn't like I was fully, you know, engulfed or accepted in the spirituality of Native ways. And we had traveled all over the country, met other Native people, and, you know, met spiritual people. So that kind of like, you know, left me kind of curious, more so. And so I continued on and doing, you know, raising my family, and working, you know, and doing fairly well in my work. Doing well, I should say, and raising the 7 children. And when I retired, I decided in 1988, when I was 58 years old, I was going to put more effort and, you know, be more aggressive in learning about my culture. And so I took an early retirement. from my work. I had changed my career from construction worker to, computer operator to different types of work. So I had experience, so I decided I'm going to retire early because I could afford it, and do more work in the community. And when I did that, I moved back to Santa Barbara County and got more involved with the Chumash tribe here in San Ynez, because that was my, basis of my ancestry. And that's where I got involved and became to understand more about them. I met certain professors. I went and met people at the museum, the Natural History in Santa Barbara. So I did a lot of research, a lot of reading, and I met certain individuals that were able to give me a lot of information. I read a lot of books about the Chumash. So it became almost like an obsession, And I said, well, I need to do that. I got to have this spiritual connection so that I could feel, if I'm not, I thought to myself, if I'm not no longer, believing in the Catholic ways, and I'm not involved in the native ways thoroughly, so I'm still floating out there. I'm still not a whole person spiritually, and I need that. I wanted that. So I looked around and I told my wife I'm going to go away and find a medicine person or a spiritual person somewhere within the Native American culture. Maybe not so much in the Chumash community, but somewhere. And I met this lady up in Shasta, and the Wintu Indian people lived up in the Shasta area, below Mount Shasta. And she was a spiritual lady. And she said, well, you can come up here, spend a few days, and we'll do ceremony and get you connected and give you knowledge of spiritual understanding in a native way. So I did that, and so the experience I had with her and with that experience I had was so fulfilling. I mean, it was just like a miracle happened to me, up on top of this mountain, not the very top of Mount Shasta, but it was a lower level. They had a big opening area where they had ceremony and prayer, and we got up and each person. Well, what made it really significant to me that this was the real thing was that when we arrived there in this big circle and the lady was up in front, ready to start the ceremony. It was in the evening, just as it was getting dark, and they had a big bonfire going. And she started praying and speaking in her language, and I was in the crowd of people, and she had 5 stools, like tree stumps up in front of her by the fire. And she had these 5 stumps, tree stumps, enough to sit on. And so she asked certain individuals to come up and sit. Well, on the 5th one, she had one more left, and she kept walking around. And it was just getting dark, and she pointed at me. I said, me? She said, yes, coming up. And then I said, well, I'm not really a spiritual leader or anything like that. She said, no, you coming up and you take the seat. So I did. And it seemed to me that night, my whole persona changed. Something came over me, and then she said, "Okay, it's your turn." Everybody had to say something, to speak to the crowd, because there was a crowd, there were people there. And so it was my turn to speak, and my wife tells me that, and the way I was speaking, it sounded like I was a different person, and I was saying a lot of things to release all these bad feelings, all this, doubts and not understanding. So, my voice was carrying throughout the forest area there. So, that was an experience that I'll always, keep in my heart, because it did change me from that point on. So I, came away from there with a very good feeling and a spiritual connection. And so today I do practice, my prayers and my ways of feeling fulfilled with the Spirit, the Great Spirit. And so that's been kind of my life from 1988 till now, is to do, because one of the main things that the lady told me, she said, when you go back to your community, wherever you live, you're going to be someone that will give back to the community. You'll give to the people, not only the Indian people, but all people. So that's the way I've felt ever since then. And I'm not saying that I'm some kind of a spiritual doctor or anything like that, but I do feel different than than that guy that used to be, didn't know who he was, kind of needed identity. So I feel fulfilled now. So that's kind of like my life up to this point. In between, we've been doing a lot of involvement with different issues in the community. But now we're old now, so we slow down and just kind of stay here. This here center. It's kind of like our foundation to turn it over to my children or the future generation to go on and do what they want or do what we can with it. But that's basically my life story right there. I have opinions and reasons why I feel the way I do in many ways concerning I noticed in the questions you talk about the culture and the history and the effect it had on the people. Well,
Yes, I was wondering, you said when you first started, or even after that, as you've been trying to learn more and more about your culture, get as close to your culture as possible, now that we've had so much time in between, so much has been lost, and especially now that the language has come back again, that's amazing. What has that experience been like, trying to connect more with your culture?
Yeah, see, that's a good point, because like I started to say, I've always been a very outspoken and critic of history, of the Chumash Native people history, because I feel that especially the Chumash and the California coastal Indian, where the mission system came in impacted the people in this area in 1769. I feel that from that point on, the devastation and the conversion of the native people into Catholicism totally devastated the people and took away their spiritual ways, cultural ways, and their way they live. So that's always been a sore point in my life, to knowing that truth happened, and yet through the years from that point on, for the past 200 years, there's been many studies, been many books written, and they never get to the truth of it all. They might touch on it, but say there was disease. But to me, my own opinion, I really feel that when the Spanish and the Europeans came, during that period, they had a plan, a master plan to take over these people, these pagans, and make them into what they wanted, whether slaves or whatever, to build what they wanted in the church. So in doing so, they had to take away the Indian culture, their identity, their language, and anything that had to do with their environment, how they live. So in the beginning, I feel that maybe it impacted, let's say San Ynez, Santa Barbara, right in there. It impacted them in a way that people accepted it. Because Indian people are very welcoming people. So when the Europeans came, they welcomed them, not knowing that this plan was in the making, to convert them. So to me, that's always been a sore point in my observation of history. And so when we talk about the impact of the language coming back, well, that's a great thing, I think it's wonderful. But it's not enough. It's a beginning of much more that needs to be done. Now, whether the next generations will pick it up and say, yes, we want to go back to the real ways, the truth has to be told. The truth has to be written. And until that's done, it's going to be hard, because, I talk to older people like my age or middle age about, what happened to our people and why they're the way they are today, and they're totally in denial. They don't want to accept the idea that the Catholics did that bad things to the Indian people. They say, well, that's history. It happens. Yes, it happens, and it did happen. But the truth is, the effect it had on our people at the time affects us today as the generations that followed. So that's why many Native people today are kind of like still lost in the in the whole idea of who are we, and what did my ancestors really do? But a lot of different stories come out of it. Then you have your different authors who's written books about it, and I think the highest point, the highest point, or the best part of it all, in my opinion, is the John P. Harrington's notes.
Yes.
When they found those notes, and he had written so much about the Indian people that if it wasn't for that, I think, that they wouldn't even begin to understand. But because he interviewed certain key people, like Maria Solaris is one of my ancestral grandmas, and so she did a lot of telling him a lot of true stories. But again, a lot of those stories were watered down or changed or maybe never told. So there's a lot of work to be done. I hope that the future generations, through education, through research, through becoming more involved with younger generations, that they'll be able to open up more doors and more understanding of the people. And that's my hope. I mean, we can say, yeah, well, they've come a long ways. We got language now and back. We got cultural events and stuff, but that's just a little speck on the bigger picture. There's a lot more to do, and I hope that that like what you're doing is part of the positive side of it. So that's kind of what my understanding of things.
Yeah. So when you said that the truth needs to be written about Chumash history, that means that untruth has been written, and obviously with for example, the Spanish, the European Explorer diaries, there's obvious bias inherent in their writings towards the native peoples. But as we come to modern ages, is there still untruth written?
Yes, I find some untruths in there because the author or whoever did the research didn't know, or doesn't look at it like, is this really the truth? They just write whatever they found out, or their own perception of it, So it's a difficult situation, I think, as far as writing, because when you have the way I see it, when you have a culture of people that were converted over to something else over a long period of time, it didn't happen in the first generation. I've never really nailed it down, but I think it probably took maybe 3 or 4 generations before they were totally converted or accepted the ways of the European. Because given that, it's hard to find out the truth, because a lot of the elders don't know. They don't know what to tell you. Like what I'm telling you today, there isn't another person that I know, my age, that thinks the same way. So they think another way. They think, oh well, that's okay. I accept it. I accept what my mother said or my grandmother said, and I don't accept what they said. So it's a difficult situation. I don't know where the answer really lies. I think books have to be written, or stories have to be told that deal with these truths, that why Indian people are the way they are. Why is there so much alcoholism within the native people? Well, let's go back and see why. I mean, what might have happened. I researched and found out that when the Spanish came into the area, with coming in, with their cargo or whatever they had, they always brought alcohol with them, wine, or alcohol. So wherever they set up camp, wherever they set up a place to build a mission, they always had alcohol. And the Indian people up to that point had not, used alcohol because there was nothing there. So when the wine came, the liquor came, like any other human being, they're curious, and the European says, well, have a drink, or drink some of that, or try it. So we got, being human, on a human curiosity, or the taste of it they like, so pretty soon they become addicted to it. So alcohol kind of spread throughout the territory of the native people. So the European knew that alcohol would be one part of their plan. Prayer would be another one. They would force the Indian to learn how to pray, to gather them all together in one place and preach to them that this God was gonna devastate them if they didn't pray. So there was a lot of fear, a lot of guilt. So you take that over a period of 100 years, 150 years, well, the end result is what we are today. We're totally oblivious, don't even understand what happened to great grandpa. So it's to me, in my own personal opinion, I'm not satisfied with what's being taught or what is out there. I mean, I'm glad to see that there is bits and pieces of it. People are beginning to learn, understand. But what saddens me the most is that my generation, who we're up in their 70s now, have totally ignored the fact. Say, no, we're too old, or we'd rather go to the movies, or we'd rather go to a powwow or something, not worry about truth about our people. And you think about it, the truth about their people is you. It's you. What happened to them is you. I mean, but it's a difficult thing, and sometimes you can't blame the people because they're helpless. What can they do? They can't change the world or change the education system. But like I say, the more things we do like this, or what you're doing, it'll catch on. It'll pick up, and somebody will take it to the next step. So I'm not totally looking at it as a negative doomsday situation. I'm more of a conservative, say, well, let's hope that it happens, And then I'll, like a place like this, you have a cultural center, that kind of helps, People say, gee, I didn't know that this, or I didn't know that, So it just kind of opens up little windows to people, I've had people call me back and say, can you send me more information about the Chumash, where do they live and everything, and what do they eat, and so those things are good things, And archaeologists used to be one of our arch enemies, because archaeologists, well, a lot of them still are, they just out there to dig up bones, or dig up remains or whatever they dig up to study, But, when I go to the universities, when I was younger, we'd go to the, like UCLA or Los Angeles Museum, and they got all these human remains in there. And, you ask them, why are these remains here, and how long have they been here? Oh, they've been here like 70-some years. And they were dug up out here and when they tore up the freeway or something. Well, why are they here? They said, well, we keep them here because we never know if there's going to be more studying, more scientists coming to study, or they have students come in and they do study the skull or what the people eat or all those kinds of things. So to me, that doesn't sit well, with human remains being studied by archaeologists or anthropologists, whatever. I think studying of skulls and bones, that's been done enough. But it goes on, and so I've met some pretty good people who are anthropologists or archaeologists who have a heart, who feel what I'm saying or what I say is the truth. They're felt kind of bad about it, but there again, it's a way of life. It's a way of studying. So it goes on.
So then what is the proper way, in your opinion, of going about and discovering the history of the Chumash people?
With the people, unfortunately, with the Chumash people, I was going to say to go to the people and talk about it and learn from the people, but there again, they're limited. So, but I think with it, let's say for example, Japanese people go there and study the Japanese history, customs. I understand that people, have history written going back for centuries. They were written by the people. And we don't have that. The Chumash never wrote anything down. But there's caves out here with images on the walls of the caves. There's rock paintings. There's things like that can be studied. But it's too hard to do. People can't, scientists or archaeologists can't figure it out, so it's much easier to study a bone that lays right there on the table. I had the experience not too long ago, I think 2 years ago. They discovered a skull out on the island out there, San Miguel Island. And it was a Chumash, 9,000 years old, 9,900 years or something, almost 10,000. So, the people lived out there on those islands probably longer than that. But this particular one was 9,000 years. So they discovered it, but they didn't want to take it out of the dirt because it was like a creek bottom, and the skull was sticking out of the side of the wall of the creek. So the head was there, so the body would be in the dirt. So they said, before we dig it up, can you send somebody out to do a spiritual ceremony over it? Because that's our custom. Whenever you pray, you find a human remain or a grave, you pray over it and remove it and put it to another place so that they can continue on in respect for the dead, you know. Well, I went out there they asked me and the elders on the tribe, you know, asked me if I wanted to go. I said, okay. So we went out there and, you know, did prayer over it and spent probably an hour with the skeletal remains, and then left, you know, and then the archaeologists went back the following week and took it out and moved it to the laboratory at UCLA, UC Santa Barbara. But they were agreed at the time that they were just going to take it out of there, remove it, and move it to study it for 30 days, and then they're going to bury it again in another location on the island. Well, they didn't do that. You know, scientific reasons. Well, we need more time. We need to study this, study that. So here it is, almost 4 years ago, and they still got the skull and remains in the UCSB. And two of the professors that worked on it is dead now. You know, he passed on. So, you know, but those kinds of things happen. It gets caught up somebody or somewhere along the line, and they figure, well, so what? It's just some old Indian bones, you know. It doesn't belong to nobody. Well, they don't know that. It did belong to somebody. And so, you know, those kinds of things happen, you know. That's just an example, but, you know, there's just so much of those, and then, you know, we'll change a little bit. There are some tribes that are actually taking on that project of taking those remains and burying them in their own place, on their own land. A couple of tribes over in the valley, that's what they do. They go and bring the remains and bury them in this beautiful piece of land, like a regular cemetery. And I think that should be done by all the tribes. You know, my proposal was to, you know, all these tribes should come together and buy one, like a national cemetery or statewide cemetery, and then bring all these remains and put them in this one place. Doesn't matter if they're from Pomo or Chumash or Yokut or whoever. Put them there, you know, but there again, you have a lot of ideas, but a lot of red tape, you know, say, oh no, we can't do that. We gotta agree this, we gotta. So then it just sits there. And now we're 100 years into the next century. 100 years have gone by when they first dug some of those bones. You know, I've heard some horror stories along the coast there, from Santa Barbara south to the Ventura. All along that coast, with all native Chumash villages, just thick with people when the Spanish first came. And in the 1920s, this guy named Rogers, archaeologist and anthropologist, went in there and they dug up just truckloads of bones and took them to Smithsonian or wherever, you know. And they're still out there. But nobody at that time in the 20s, there was no laws or any kind of restrictions. So it was like a free for all, you know, and digging up Indian bones. So that's you know, he writes a book about it, tells about where they are and everything like that. You know, these kinds of things went on, and I wonder, you know, okay, if that was going on in the 1920s, where were the Indian people? Where were they to protest it or stop it. You know, they were already, what do you call it when they're assimilated into the system, you know, so they probably didn't care. Probably was already, see, a lot of the Indian people, in the 1920s, when my mother was a young lady, young girl, growing up, a lot of the Indian people didn't identify as Chumash anymore. They became Mexican or Filipino or something. So in the 1920s and 30s, there was no base or home base where they could say this is our culture. It's not like today we have San Ynez where they're doing some of that. But back then, there was none. So nobody said nothing, or even if they did say something, they were scared that they're gonna be, retaliation. So it was a bad time, and people went through a lot of hard times during those times, and so that's why when I did my own research back in the 80s and went to my mother, she was still alive. She lived till she was 94 years old, but at the time I told her, what I was doing, my work, and she said, "Oh no, you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be digging up old, skeletons in a closet." And see, they wanted me to find out more about the Chumash people. I mean, her ancestor. But I did it anyway, against her will. And she was very upset with me, but, I felt that it was something I had to do, and I needed very, very much to find that connection and identity myself. And another thing I wanted to point out was that the Indian people, the Chumash people, were not the only people that had to go through this devastation and being totally wiped out. In the Philippine Islands, same thing happened over there. In Spanish invaded the Philippines, 1521, took over, converted the native Filipinos to Catholicism. The Philippine Islands is one of the most devoted Catholic countries in the Far East. So, it happened to them. I mean, they no longer practice their own ancestral ways. They're Americanized or Hispanic culture is strong. Spanish influence is very strong. Mexico, same thing. Mexico, the Aztecs and the Incas and all those Indians that lived there before the 1500s, same thing. Spanish came in, the Catholic Church came in. I have no animosity towards any church. I speak about the Catholics because those were the ones that did what they did to the Indian people. But today, I respect all religion. People can believe what they want. I don't. It's whatever works for them, But in Mexico, same thing. The Indian people down there are the lower class, and I don't know. You've probably done some research in Mexico, and it's pretty sad situation. The Spanish influence. So again, you have Spanish impact or influence here in the Western Hemisphere, the native people, through the southern Texas, Florida, and those states. You have Spanish influence in the Philippines, in Mexico, many of the islands in the Pacific impacted by Europeans, you know. So, is it, you know, sometimes I wonder, was it, was it done purposely? I mean, I really believe that during that period of time, Spain and Portugal had a master plan, and they went throughout the world, said we're going to convert all these people, because we need to get more you know, people in the church. And I think that's what they had in mind. So when they landed here in California, I believe that you know, they came here with the intentions of, you know, we have a way planned to get these people to go our way, because they seem to, some of the research work that we did, they seem to go to the most friendliest areas of Native people. They said they would go like along the coast. They hardly went up north, you know, above the Mission San Rafael, Mission Sonoma. Beyond that, there was more resistance, you know, from the Indian people. So, you know, there's a good book written called Chief Marin, about Indian people up in the Bay Area that were when they built the missions, and how they resisted, and they ran way up into the mountains along the coast to resist this conversion. But they eventually, same thing happened. You know, when we lived up north, and I met those descendants of those Indians, they were like us. You know, they were like totally unaware of their culture, you know, and trying their best to hang on to what little that they had, you know. So, I don't know, I mean, have we covered any more you want to?
Yeah. Let's see. Let me go through with that. I was wondering how, as a Chumash, you know, we've come now to the modern day and age, and there is a lot of distance, as we've talked about, and a lot of culture lost between now and when the Chumash, your ancestors, when they were living and practicing their ways. So how do you reconcile those past roots with the present? Or since they are part of you, is there no reconciliation that needs to happen?
Reconcile, meaning?
Like, is there conflict between the two?
Conflict?
Between between today's modern day and age and things that happen today, and between the past.
Oh, okay, like if there's a resistance from.
Is it harder to accept your past now that we're here in the present? Do you see that with some people, or even with yourself? I know you were talking earlier about when you looked at Catholicism and you were looking at Native religion. There was conflict between those. So there was some conflict in trying to, well, this is what I grew up as, but this is what my ancestors were.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's conflict, and I think the reconciliation is a better understanding, you know, understanding the truth about it, finding out the truth of what really happened, so that you could make, you know, a better choice or a better decision. But I think education, better research, more research, and good, widespread. I think I wrote it down here. I think you have to go out further, you know, reach out further to other tribes.
So you
Yeah.
have to gain a better understanding the truth of what really happened. What is that truth? Is that truth looking at through what happened through the eyes of your ancestors, or is that truth just looking at the plain facts of what happened?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, but the plain fact is I kind of compared to the Jewish people with the Holocaust. You know, they seem to totally observe themselves of what happened in those horrible experiences of their ancestors. So I think if we today can accept that truth, that the suffering and the devastation happened for real. I mean, some people survived. We survived till today. But accepting the fact that it wasn't really what the authors want us to believe, you know, like, oh, the Indians came willingly, they were very friendly, you know. I think the truth, knowing the truth, makes a person believe, understand what he's trying to learn better. Because if you only learn half truth or not the whole thing, then I don't think that's complete. So yeah, it's necessary to and I know sometimes, you know, it's difficult because people say, well, so what? I mean, you know, it happened a long time ago, and I've had people tell me that. But it's, to me, and a lot of people believe that the more you understand it, the better that you're going to accept it or reject it, you know. So, as simple as that, you know.
Yeah. I think another question that I had was, then as we're constructing this idea of a Chumash history, even what happened before the Europeans came, now we can do a little bit of that with the field notes that we have now and how they've been translated as well. What exactly is the Chumash idea of history? Is it so different from, say, a more Western idea of history, or is it more of an alternative? Do things happen in cycles? Is there a view that there's a duality to certain events? Is there any certain prevailing concept in such an idea of telling stories or relating the history of your people?
Well, I don't know if I understand what you're asking.
So, like for example, if I could give an example of some cultures, like ancient Greek culture, if you look at some of Pindar's odes and you look at some of his writings, he talks about how there's somewhat of a duality. There's man and there's God. There's man and there's the gods. And so there's a duality to a historical event that happened. It's not just the man, but there's the gods as well, and the gods are determining what happens to the man. So there's an interplay between two extremes, and that can play out if you're wanting to make this is what their history is. That can play out into their idea of history. Is there something like that in Chumash history, or is it just more?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the way I could probably understand it better or explain it. If we knew the true history, the true we understood the truth about how our people worshipped or how they prayed and why they prayed the way they did, and we knew, and then we can accept the fact that you have Catholicism over here, which we didn't even know anything about, but our people practice a spirituality, belief in a great spirit in their way. They lived every day of their life believing in their spirituality or their existence in this world because of this spiritual being that they believed in. Okay, if we as the modern contemporary people could understand that and accept it as a truth, then we can say, well, you know, I can believe this more than I do Catholicism, because Catholicism was something that came in during a period of time when my people lived here for thousands of years, believing in their spiritual ways, and here comes another religion that wipes it out and says, no, that's no good. We're going to take this, and this is going to be. So sure, after, like I said, I can repeat again, after so many generations of this Catholicism, sure, they're going to become Catholics. They're going to believe in every prayer. So it's a human nature, you know, to when you lose, when you're living a culture, you're living every day believing in this, in whatever, you know, spiritual ways that they had, you don't think about anything else, you know. And then all of a sudden something changes. So yeah, I think if you can understand and to be able to do that, is going to take a lot of research and reading and writing by new native people. I mean, let's get some native people to write about these things and have their writings accepted in the overall education system. I mean, there are some, but I'm talking about these kinds of truths. You know, so it's a lot of different things. It's not just one or two points that need to be understood. There's you know, the system, the way people. If you produce some kind of study or lesson project out of this, and then you want to present it to, you know, a program or a study class, it's how they're going to do it. If it's too complicated or too outrageous, then you know they'll say, oh well, we'll just set that aside. You got to become a little more aggressive. Indian people or people doing like what you're doing have to become a little more aggressive as far as education, so that the wrongs. Let's take, for example, a fourth grader would go to the mission and listen to the docent, and they talk about the missions. Mm-hmm. So that little fourth grader goes home to mommy and says, I went to the mission today and I learned about the Indian people, the Chumash people, how they were at the missions a long time ago. But whatever they understood about them is, oh, they made mush, or they made baskets, and they made candles, and that's all. That little fourth grader grows up to be an adult, and that's all they learn. They'll repeat those things. I mean, they'll even joke about it, you know, say, oh, that's what I... So I think those lessons in school, starting at the little kids, have to become a little more, you know, constructive and more, where they're gonna learn something, which would be the truth. You don't have to be harsh, you know. It could be done in a way that children can learn and become a little, like I have a little 8-year-old, Karen's little daughter, Lily. She's only 8 years old, but she's already saying things about Chumash history and words and language, you know, that it's surprising, that, you know, compared to her classmates. Only because she goes to the summer camps in the summer where they teach the children Chumash words, Chumash ways, you know, whatever the instructors know, or whatever they understand, they'll teach the kids when they remember. So those kinds of things are, I think, is critical, because a child is right at the learning point of their life, and they're going to learn that stuff. And if they learn the wrong thing, it's going to stick with them all their life. And I think basically that's what happened with descendants of that ancestor that was converted. You know, these descendants today have learned the wrong thing. So, and it's too hard or too difficult or too complicated to go into and find out what really happened, you know. And you know, people they'd rather live the life of what's offered out here than try to become a change, you know. People don't like to change. That's pretty much it. I don't know.
Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
Well, you know, I'm 83 years old, and I feel that, you know, that my elders that are my age, that have a little knowledge about this Chumash culture or history, will be gone soon. One will be gone one of these days, and I hope that the next generation carries on, and the work that you're doing, people carry on and learn more and more, and that's what's going to make the changes. It's not going to happen overnight, and it takes time, and it takes ambition, and you know, people being aggressive to learn things. But I have you know, I feel that there is hope. You know, there is hope that the language. I'd love to live to see the day when, you know, my people could speak the language again. You know, and completely. But you know, it'll happen someday, because you know, it's like anything else. You open up a faucet of water, and it's like you open it full all the way, and all the more water comes out. It's like more education comes out, and the more you open up different avenues. So I have hope. You know, the work that we do here at the center, we want to continue on with learning and giving back to the community, and but you know, I will appreciate the fact that I can still do these interviews, and I can still write and talk about these things. I mean, I'm just glad that I can do that a little bit, that I can contribute. You know, I feel it might help. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I'm honored that you could share your life story with me and your thoughts on what has happened with Chumash history. I do hope that more truth is found, and that it continues to be found, because that is the only way I think that we can learn more about what happened with
truth,
Chumash.
right.
Yes.
Right. That's I mean, that's, to me, that would be the key factor to learn more and understand. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, Roma. Appreciate your work. You're doing a good job.